recording. Good morning, all. Welcome to Null Villupuram Meet. This is Mohammed Adam here. I'm a chapter lead at Null Villupuram. Um, so, today's agenda for the meet is Introduction to PCI-DSS by Roshan Thomas and awareness session on financial frauds by me. We will be taking over the session. I'll give a short intro about Roshan Thomas. He's a senior PCI QSA consultant, and he's heading technical security services in Roswell Labs LLP. And he has more than 10 plus experience in various organizations uh, like providing auditing or consulting to various countries, and much more. So he's a mentor for me in the real time. So over to Roshan.
Thanks, Adam. Good morning, everybody. I'll share my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah. Yes.
All right. So today what we'll do is we will do a very basic introduction to PCI DSS. This is something like what we do is a 2-day course. We are cramping it to an hour. So consider this as an introduction. But however, even though it is a 2-day course, right? So the standard as such is not very complex. It's a very simple standard. Um, and it's free, and you will be able to go and pick it up from online and read through the standard. So before getting started, let me introduce myself. My name is Roshan. I am a senior consultant here in Crossbow. So as Adam told, I head the technical security services department. I'm also a PCI QSA and CSP and CSC. So that's something about me. So we'll get started. With respect to PCI, right? So we'll look at what PCI is, how it came to the picture, what it does, and things like that. So uh, if you look at PCI, what it stands for is Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, right? So just like anything we have to protect, right? So if it left to the people, people might not take good practices to protect that particular data. That is where all this particular standard or law or things like that come into the picture, like ISO, HIPAA, DPA, and things like that. So PCI is one of the standards. This mainly involved protecting the card numbers and financial information revolving around that particular card number. Now, earlier, how the standard came into the picture is, we know about different card brands, right? Like Visa, Mastercard, Discover, JCB, things like that, right? So all these people had their own independent standard, and they used to come to the bank or any financial organization and say that, okay, for you to use the card, you need to make sure these security controls have to be implemented. Now, over the course of time, it became very difficult for the bank to implement all these controls from different vendors. So that's where payment brands got together and told, okay, why don't we create a single standard so that it is easy for the banks or the merchant or whoever is implementing this particular standard to be very easy and things like that. So that's roughly how the standard came into the picture. Standard is pretty much sourced from the crowd inputs, as well as there is a standard creating committee which is PCI SSE Security Standard Council. Over the course of every 3 years, they refresh the standard. This is with respect to newer technologies coming into the picture, or newer ways to securing things, or if something goes out of date, they will deprecate it, and things like that. So it is a really good standard. Now it is more than 10 plus years this standard came into the picture, and over the course of time it evolved into a very good standard. At this point of time the version is 3.2.1, and basically it have 12 requirement. It's very simple. Like I told earlier, you will be able to pick the standard, read through it, and you will understand in and out, okay, this is what the standard high level talks about. Now, as I told, it mainly involved card numbers like credit card number or a debit card number or things like that. So now we will have to define who have to follow this particular standard, right? So standard is out there, but who will have to follow it? So standard high level define this as the criteria. So anybody who store, process, or transmit credit or debit card numbers, they will have to make sure they are at PCI compliant. Now, here we can see that a bank, right, which is very large organization, who actually does store the card number, who process the card number, who transmit the card number, they will have to you know get the PCI compliance. However, on the other side of the coin, we also have a very small merchant who have a POS terminal, right? So thus that person also have to become a PCI DSS compliant, right? So we will look into how that can be, transpired, because like I said, this is one particular standard, and the same standard is applicable for a very big bank and a very small, kirana shop, right? So however, standard gives you the ability to pick, depending upon what processes you do, what controls you can implement, right? So if it is an iframe checkout, this is what we will do. Or if it is only a POS, probably I just need to, look into these particular controls, so on and so forth. So like I said, it is for anybody who stores, process, and transmit. Storing is something which you store in a database. Like typical example will be you go to flipkart.com, and you can store the card number in the flipkart.com, and next time when you do a checkout, they will ask which card number you want to select. That is a typical scenario of a store. Process is something which either in terms of transmission of the card number, where to send this particular card number. So maybe flipkart.com have tie up with ICICI and HDFC, and probably I should send it to, should I send it to ICICI, should I send it to HDFC? That is one use case scenario of processing. And transmitting is very simple. You pick the card number and send it to somebody else. So it's on the wire. This is the base criteria about PCI DSS. Now, we will look into what forms, what are the data elements we'll have to protect. So this will be anything on the front of the card number is something which we'll have to protect. Like you can see, there are 16-digit number for some brands. This number varies. Then you have chip data. Then you have a pin block or a pin number or a CVV. Now, those are considered sensitive data. Like, these elements probably you will see on the back of the card, like a full track data, which is the black strip you see, right? So if you read it through a MagStripe reader, you will be able to see raw data inside this particular card. This is where, in earlier cards, a lot of skimming attacks and, things like that happen. So they take this particular data from this particular track. And over the course of time, technology evolved, and then they started storing this particular data in a encrypted manner inside that particular chip, which is also associated to a pin. So it is not very straightforward like what it used to be to get the data out with a chip and pin card. CVV, like the last 3-digit number which is on the back of the card. And on the front of the card, you have PAN number, which is a 16-digit number. you have the name of the person, you have the expiry date, and you have the service code. Service code is typically, associated to a brand of the card, miles card, or things like that, or can I use this particular card overseas? So there are a lot of business logic written on that particular service code. So it is only a representation of that particular logic. So what PCI standard says is anything on the front of the card number, you will be able to store. That means you can store full card number, which is the 6-digit number. You can store the expiry date. You can store the name of the person, so on and so forth. But anything on the back of the card number, you are not supposed to store, which is typically your OTP or CVV2, anything on the track data, or things like that. You can't store it. So that is the very high level overview of what is PCI and where it is getting applied to. Now, before moving on to the next slide in terms of requirements or things like that, how do we scope it? Do we have any doubts on the slides we have covered so far? Right. So, yeah. Anybody have any question, please? Right. So, if you don't have any question, I have a question for you guys. So, the question is this: which are the elements of the CXV, which is cardholder environment, or which needs to be encrypted if stored? So, I have covered, what we can store, what we can't store. Anybody have an answer to this?
PAN.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Naveen Kumar, you are saying something.
Hello.
Hello.
So, anybody have an answer to this?
Yes. So we can store a card number which should be encrypted.
Here, the answer will be A. Store the PAN number, which is your 60-digit number, and probably your mail. So, and this have to be stored encrypted. So, this is where you see in e-commerce like Flipkart or something like that. When you go, they will show you, okay, do you want to use this card or this card? That essentially means they are storing that particular entire 60-digit number on the back end, right? So that's how it works. And you are not allowed to store the CVV. You're not allowed to store the PIN or a PIN block or OTP or anything like that. Or you are not allowed to store the full track data, which is there on the back of the card. So that is how it is. Now, the ecosystem, right? So card is one aspect of it. Now, where all we can use this particular card, how the card come into the picture in the overall scheme of things. So there are different entities to this particular entire ecosystem. So first is we have payment brands. Payment brands are like Visa, Mastercard, Amex, American Express, Discover. We have RuPay in India, things like that. So, what these people do is they act as a switch or a route, so they will be able to say that, okay, this card belongs to this particular bank, and they will be able to send that particular transaction to that particular bank, typically to a network routing, right? So this is done on top of a financial switch, where they will say that, okay, these bin range is the first 6 numbers of the card number. Okay, this bin range belong to ICICI, so this transaction have to go to ICICI. So this is what mainly they does. Second is the issuing bank. Issuing bank is somebody who gives you the card. In case you have a SBI bank, SBI card, the issuing bank here will be SBI, respectively, ICICI, HDFC, who wherever you have the account, that is the place where they issue the card, and that's called a issuing bank. Now, acquiring bank is a little bit different, where, for example, you have an SBI card. You can use that SBI card in SBI ATM or in HDFC ATM also, right? So in this particular case, HDFC will be an acquiring bank, and SBI is also, from a transaction perspective, it is also acquiring, and both acquiring and issuing bank. Anybody who is collecting that particular transaction, be it a POS, be it a ATM, anything like that. So they are called a acquiring bank. Now, typically the transaction flow looks like this. The acquiring bank will collect that particular card number, and it will see whether it is a Visa card or MasterCard or whatever it is. So it will send it to that particular payment brand and say that, okay, I have this particular transaction. This is a BIN number, and it's a Visa card. Whom should I send it to? So Visa will come back and say that, okay, you need to send it to HDFC because this looks like HDFC card. And the transaction routes to that particular relevant bank. So, and you will get authorization back from the issuing bank saying, okay, you have enough money and I'm detecting this particular money for transaction. And the acquiring bank or the terminal will get an acknowledgement saying, okay, the transaction is completed, that person can take out the merchandise, right? So this is a very high level overflow of flow of typical transaction. Now, again, we have merchants here. Merchants are Flipkart, Amazon, or Kirana shop. Anything who takes card payment and give you some goods back, they are classified as a merchant. And we also have a service provider. Service provider are people who enable this particular transaction flow. We have a lot of cooperative banks in India, right? But however, these are very small banks. They don't have a proper technology stack behind it. Now, those technology stack will be provided by some service provider like Euronet or Sarvatra or things like that. So Hitachi, these are some of the major players in India, where they will provide the core banking, they will provide the internet banking, all the tech stack these companies will provide. And all of a sudden, a small cooperative bank will be having internet banking, ATMs, they will issue cards and things like that. So that will be a typical uh, entity which we can classify as a service provider. Right. Now,
Roshan,
yes.
sorry to interrupt you. So, uh, I need to understand the scenario. For example, if I'm going for a petrol tank to get petrol for my bike, so I have a card which is from a issuing bank. Let's say it's a HDFC bank. So I had a HDFC card and I'm swiping the petrol bunk. So they will be having a ICICI card. So that will be called as a acquiring bank, right? Acquiring bank of the merchant.
Right. So uh, uh, you told ICICI, right? So if they have an ICICI POS, it is ICICI will be the acquiring bank here, and the HDFC is the card you have. So HDFC is the issuing bank. Always the issuing bank is where you have the bank account, right? So you will have HDFC card. That's called the issuing bank,
Got it. So once
right?
the transaction started, so it will be going back to the payment card branch, and then it will go to the issuing bank, and it will check like if the account exists, the balance exists, then the transaction will occur.
That's
Is it right?
absolutely correct. Yes.
Okay.
Now, in some scenario, the transaction doesn't go to the payment brand itself. These are the typical transactions like HDFC card on a HDFC ATM or HDFC card on a HDFC POS terminal, right? So, because already the bank know that, okay, this is a card issued by me, so it will not send that particular transaction to Visa or Mastercard, right? So that those transactions are called honest, and anything which you have a combination, it is called a office transactions.
Got it. Nice.
Right. Any other doubts?
Yes. For
Yes.
yes, I want to ask that. For example, I'm paying an exam fee, right?
Mhm.
the website redirects towards Razorpay or any other getting any other service to getting your credit card number.
Right.
So will it be into the merchant or it will be the service provider?
Here in this particular scenario, Razorpay is considered as a payment gateway or a service provider. For that particular merchant context, he is a service provider. He is somebody who is giving service to that particular merchant, right? So, that particular why we have a payment gateway is, for us to directly capture the card, we will have to go through a lot of hoops and paperwork with the bank. Now, what this tech startups like Razorpay or CC Avenue or things like that, what they have done is they have made this particular process very easy. And what used to take like months, now you can do it in an hour's time. And they are considered as a service provider.
Okay. So what is actually money transfer between the merchant and the service provider? For example, for this example, I paid some exam fee to the service provider, which is Razorpay or any other pay, the tech startup you explain about.
Mhm.
Then what is happen when the transaction is complete?
What is? Can you repeat the question? What is?
What happen after the transaction is complete?
Right.
The fees get deducted.
Right. So in this particular scenario, a merchant have a website, or for in your use case, it's a college website collecting fees. Now, for college, it might be difficult to set up a payment gateway and things like that. So they ask Razorpay people to see, I have to collect this particular information, and would you help us? So Razorpay will give you onboard you and give you some APIs and things like that. So you can send the card number to that particular API and say that, okay, I want to charge this particular card number for 50,000 rupees. So in that particular scenario, Razorpay is acquiring, and Razorpay might have a connection to the backend, their bank, right? So it might be SBI, it might be HDFC. Most of the scenario, they will have multiple connection to multiple banks. This is because banks, how they make money is off the transaction charge, right? So Razorpay will route this particular transaction to the best lowest transaction charge, or something who have a high success rate, so, and they will pass it on to the, then the flow will be seen, you will pass it to acquiring bank, it will go to the Visa Mastercard network, and it will go to issuing bank, authorization happen, and confirmation comes back to Razorpay, and they in turn send the confirmation back to the merchant, where he will be able to say that, okay, I have got the money. But the actual money transfer from a bank to bank happens a couple of days later, when there is a settlement happening.
Yes, got it.
Okay. Any other questions? Um, Anybody have? You can type also in the chat box if you have any questions. Right. So if you don't have any other questions, we'll just move on to the next slide.
Yeah, Roshan Anantaram, sorry.
Yes.
I got one small question. We have, when we get the service providers, right? Like, for example, a Razorpay or a Smart Hub or any of these guys, where we do our payment. The data they collect is they collect the complete data, the card number, the CVV, the expiry date, the name of the person holding the card, everything is being captured. How secure is the service provider's gateway, and what is the guarantee that they will not misuse it? Though nowadays we get a second authentication for a from the phone or something like that, but some people don't even do that. They just transact that. For example, one of the main audit companies, or rather, I would say a forum, they don't they just ask your card number, CVV data, and yes, the transaction is done. They don't, you don't even get a pin back to get your things validated.
Right. So that is where the problem, started. People were not taking due care on these kind of transactions, and that is where the entire PCI came into the picture, right? So PCI is some kind of enforcement to make sure, okay, all these people who are involved in this particular ecosystem, starting from payment brands to service providers, follow certain rules, so that the card number doesn't get leaked out. Now, if you look from a payment ecosystem standpoint, PCI is one standard which you can look at. All these companies like Razorpay, CC Avenue, all these people are PCI DSS certified, so they make sure these transactions are secure and it's stored securely and things like that. But like you said, this is a standard. This is a point in time audit, right? So what happens when the auditor walk out of the organization? What happens 2 months down the line? People might not follow that particular process, and there is potential chances of a breach.
I agree, Roshan. Thanks for that. One another small thing is, unless otherwise, if we do not see when in a payment service provider, when we really enter the data, if it is not put somewhere as PCI certified, is it advisable not to go through that payment gateway? Because
Uh,
everyone may not get PCI certified, right?
right. So PCI certification is one sort of validation where you can see whether they are PCI certified. If they are PCI certified, they used to display their certificate of compliance and things like that. So that is some validation to make sure, okay, uh, this is quality where you can have a reasonable trust in place. So if it is not a PCI certified payment gateway, which is very rare these days, it's better, advice that we don't go through that particular payment gateway.
Yeah. Thanks, Roshan.
Anybody have any other questions? Right. So we will move on to the next. Uh, the next is we'll look at typical service provider. We talked about service provider earlier also. So we'll look at different service provider. So these are some of the service provider, like a call center is a service provider. Somebody who develops a software is a service provider. Somebody who do some kind of service. For example, uh, all these banks have a service provider who go and fill money in ATM. They are also considered as a service provider. So all these people have to make sure they are PCI certified. That's what it is. Right. Let's now look at where all we will find this particular card number, right? So in terms of storage. Now, if you look at typical card numbers, we will find people storing it in a database. It will be there in the servers. It will be there in the ATMs. When people do the tally and things like that, it might be there in your desktops or a SharePoint or things like that. It will be there in your data warehouses, and it will be there in the backups, tapes and things like that. So when you do an audit, or when you do anything with respect to PCI DSS, it is not enough to secure only the database. You will have to identify where all the card number is. Now there are tools which you will be able to leverage to scan the entire network in terms of where the card number is. So basically, the tool will go and log into the system and scan the entire files and say, okay, I see card number these places. What you want to do about it. Now that particular tool will also have the capability to either encrypt on the fly, or delete that particular file if it is not relevant or things like that. But as I told, it is important for us to look through all these particular different data areas where the card number might be involved, and we have to secure in all these particular places. Now, since we have identified, okay, these are the places, which we have card number, so all these places, all these things, or all this infrastructure, we'll have to protect it. Now, what else we'll have to protect? So here comes the question of scoping, right? What is the scope of PCI DSS? Now we will be able to say that, okay, I am PCI DSS. So the entire organization is PCI DSS protected. That is something which a lot of people, have a misunderstanding on. Actually, we don't. It's very rare that we certify an entire organization for a PCI DSS certification. If it is a payment gateway or a bank or anything like that, it is only a very small, minute component. If it is a payment gateway, like the size of Flipkart, it will be hardly 10 or 15 servers, so it is only a very small component we will certify as a payment gateway. Now let's see what is scoping. Now this is a slide or a screenshot from the standard itself. So what this says is anything which which store, process, or transmit cardholder data is in the scope of PCI. And it also says that or any system which is sitting next to it is also in the scope of PCI, which here in the sense, if you have one system which is your core banking, you also have a HR management system, which is, even if it is it doesn't have card number, but if it is sitting in the same network, same VLAN, we will have to take that as into the scope. Now, that is the primary criteria. Secondary criteria is any system which is connecting to that particular network directly or indirectly. Like, for example, um, how do we manage this particular system? We connect over SSH, so then that particular box which we are connecting to, through SSH, that have to be part of the PCI scope. Or any system which is providing security services, right? So here it will be something like a patch management solution or an antivirus or a log management solution. So these systems have to be taken as part of the PCI DSS scope. So on a very high level, we can say that, okay, anything which have a card number system sitting next to it, these have to be part of the scope of the PCI. And also any security system which is connecting to that particular system or that particular scope, and any system which is connecting directly or indirectly or supporting any PCI requirement, right? So even though it looks a little complex, it's very simple. However, this is where a lot of debate happens between QSAs and the merchants, or the organization where we go and audit, because this is left to interpretation. So I can increase the scope or decrease the scope, based upon how I draw the security controls. And there was a problem of interpretation. That is where PCI came up with this particular framework, saying that, but this is what we will have to do. Now, if you look at an inversion, what is not in the scope of PCI, right? So it's very clear. It's very simple. Anything which is not processing any, CST or SAD. SAD is called sensitive authentication data, or any system which is not connected to this particular system, we can, take it out of the scope of the PCI DSS. Right. So, any questions so far?
Yeah, I have one question.
Yes.
So if I have to have an e-commerce website, if I plan to store a bank account holder, a bank account number, IFSC code, like detail for the bank details, if it's apply for a PCI.
Let me rephrase the question. So if you want to store a card details on your website, do you need to become a PCI? Yes, you need to become a PCI.
Okay. So bank side it's not required. I mean the bank details.
Can you explain a little bit more about what?
Yeah. So I have a client. They having. I'm storing with the bank account number, IFSC code, address, and etc. It's not a card number actually. Bank account numbers. So is that required for PCI?
No, bank account number is not required for PCI.
Okay, fine.
Right.
Simple.
Right. So I have question. So the question is this: which of these systems can we scope out from the scope of PCI DSS? A, antivirus server; B, patching server; C, encryption server; D, development server.
Hello.
Uh,
Hello. Yes. I want to know about it, how why the encryption server is out of scope of PCI DSS assessment.
I didn't say that it is out of scope. This is a question which can be out of scope, which can I put out of scope.
Okay.
no,
So
actually, it is connected with the servers. I mean, the PCI, it is accessing or storing.
Right.
Connected with the server, it will be scope. I think
Yes.
it's everything is connected with the network.
Right. So one server here, we will be able to remove it. That is development server. So let's look at a option A. Option A is directly falling under the framework of, does this provide a security service? Uh, so antivirus is
Means
providing a security service. So it is in the scope of PCI DSS. Patching
in
is
some
again.
cases, development server also will be connected, right? Maybe some.
That is where we will have to remove the development server from the scope of PCI DSS.
Okay,
I
fine.
don't see any reason why development server have to be connected to the production, but we will have to evaluate what is the reasoning behind it, and if it is something which we can disconnect, development server have to be disconnected and removed from the scope of the PCI DSS,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, in a typical engagement, when we go for the audit, there will be a lot of these kind of scenario. This server is coming into the picture. This server is in the same network. Typical normal misorganization in a IT infra, right? So, what as part of the scoping exercise, we will also do the consulting. We will see that okay, this is the best way to do a reorganization. You might have to move this particular server from this place to this VLAN, or disconnect this particular connection from this servers or this VLAN to this segment, so on and so forth. Why is because we want to make sure the entire scope is reduced. So like I told, PCI have a 12 requirements. Now, if you want to implement all this particular 12 requirement on a big scope, right? It will be too difficult. So I have a customer who have 10,000 machines, and it is a nightmare for us for to do the scan, do the patching, things like that. We literally almost do the scans every day, right? And that's how it is. But if you reduce that particular entire scope to 10 machines, it is super simple to handle the entire PCI DSS at this scale, right? Uh,
Yes, yes. Good.
yeah. Any other questions, guys?
Yeah, Roshan Anantram. See, there are certain organizations where they don't store card data or process any card data or transmit card data, but they develop card related applications. As maybe at the back end to support the applications could be a card related application, and in some cases they don't even develop card data. In that case, the PCI scope, is it there or it is totally out of scope?
Right. So, in that particular case, we have a different standard, which is called PADSS or SSF, which is directly related to vendors who are developing this particular application. For example, let's say that somebody is developing a software which sits inside an ATM, right? That software as such, in the developer's place, it is not in the scope of PCI DSS, but the developer will have to demonstrate that okay, this is a securely built software. I have done code review. It goes through multiple testing, and this is something which you can take and put it inside a PCI network. So
Okay, okay. Thanks, Roshan. I think
thank you.
that clarified it. Yeah.
Right, right. So, We will move on to the next requirements. Like, we'll cover all the requirements on a very high level. Like I told, this is just an introduction. This is just 1.5 hour we are doing. I would totally recommend you guys to go and download this particular standard. It is totally free. You go to PCI SSE website and you'll be able to download this particular standard and go through it. You'll be able to see more details into the standard. So let's look at the requirement number one. Requirement number one says you need to install and maintain firewall configuration to protect the cardholder data. Now this comes as a point where we'll have to have some sort of differentiation between an internal and an external network, right? So how the connection from the external to internal is happening. Do we have a stateful inspection firewall? Things like that. This is what the requirement one talks about. Now if you look a little bit more into requirement one, on a very high level, this is what it talks about. You need to have a firewall, and all connections from the external network to the internal network have to land in a DMZ. DMZ is a demilitarized zone. It is a buffer zone between your internal network and the external network. So what kind of servers we'll put here is like load balancer, or web servers, or a jump server. These are the servers which we will put it into the DMZ. Now, second point is all connection from to the internal network. Anything which is connecting to the internal network have to originate from the DMZ itself. So you have an external network, you have a DMZ, and you have a internal network. And third is all connection from internal network to untrusted network, which is going out, should also be going through a DMZ zone. So on a very high level, this is what the requirement one talks about. Any doubts, any clarification on this one?
Yeah, I have one more.
Yes.
So if I am accessing a storing card data servers, my system also in a DMZ zone, right?
You should ideally put your system in the DMZ zone.
Okay.
So that means you are an admin, is it?
Yeah, yeah.
So if you're admin, you can be in the internal network.
Yes, I'm
right.
internal network only.
Right. In the DMZ is more like a corporate, data center kind of a scenario, where you have web servers and things like that. If you are connecting to that particular PCI network from your laptop, your laptop will be considered as an internal network. Either you connect over a VPN or you connect from a jump machine. So typically these are the best practices we see in the industry.
Okay, like my system also should be PCI compliant, or
again, that depends on how you connect. Like
okay.
if you connect over a jump server, your system might not need to be PCI compliant.
Okay.
VPN or other techniques, probably you will have to you will have to make sure your system is also PCI compliant.
Okay, fine, fine.
Any other questions? So we'll move on to requirement number two. Requirement number two is also very simple. So is you need to harden your machine. In a very simple terms, it is like this: do not use vendor supplied defaults for system password and other security parameters. Should also make sure you harden this particular system. So a typical example will be, let's take two different servers, right? Now I have an app server, I have a web server. For both this particular thing, I'm using a Ubuntu machine. But I'm here in this particular scenario, I'm using a different port. One I'm using 270.15, and one place I'm using 443, and the users are different. Here what kind of access I can give, it is different. So based upon this particular functionality of this particular server, I should make sure I harden that particular system. Now, typically, the hardening standard comes from CIS, which is Center for Internet Security, or NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. So you can pick any of this particular standard which is relevant to your machines, your infrastructure. You can customize it. These standards normally come with um, 300 400 kind of a mind or checklist. You can say very simply go and take 50 of them and say that, okay, these are the stuff which I'll do for my server because this is what makes most sense for me. And make a new document saying, okay, hardening document for Ubuntu. And that's something which you can submit to the auditor, saying this is my hardening document, this is what I did for my hardening, right? That is on a high level requirement number 2. Requirement number 3 is to protect your card number. This mainly talks about encryption. How do you encrypt, what you encrypt with, where do you store the key and things like that. So, but before coming into the question of encryption itself, like I told, when we do the scoping, we will try to minimize the scope to the least possible so that the attack surface is minimized. Now here also we will look at that particular data, check whether do we need this particular data, right? Now this is what something with standard also says. You need to make sure you have a data retention policy. I have done audits for banks, and these some of the banks I had seen, they store this particular data for like last 12 years or something like that. From the time they started printing cards, card number, and most of the cards are expired, right? When they back up that particular system, these cards again go to the backup system, so on and so forth. So it's a cascading effect. And they have to put all sort of controls on this particular, all the associated machines where they have card numbers, right? So what standard proposes, you need to make sure you look at this particular data and ask, do I need this particular data? Does it make business sense for us to store this particular data? If it is not required, then we will have to remove it from the system, right? So we'll say that, okay, in India, typically the card numbers expires in 3 years, 36 months is what typical cards, expiration dates comes as. So, and there is no point in storing that card more than that, right? So let's say that, okay, I'll say that, okay, I'll store all the card number 6 months after the expiry, and I will delete after that. So that is one kind of a data retention policy. After 6 months, you will have some sort of cron job or, some sort of card scanning tool to, go ahead and scan this particular thing and say that, okay, delete this particular data, right? That is one thing. Second is, as we discussed earlier, do not store sensitive authentication data after authorization. Now, this is a very tricky scenario. In the first slide, I told, don't store sensitive authentication data. But here it says, after authentication. What it means is you can store sensitive authentication data, but before authorization, before the transaction goes through. Now, one typical use case which I can say, which I have audited is, we have this particular in-flight entertainment system, right, where you can swipe the card against the the kiosk in the back of the screen for the airlines, and the transaction doesn't go online. It doesn't go that time. What it happens is it will store the PAN number, it will store your PIN or whatever it is, right? So your CVV, whatever they're collecting, it will store in a server on the aircraft, and as soon as it lands, it will have a sync with the terminal, and that particular transaction get authorized. Now, till the time it is getting authorized, you can store that particular data, but not after that, right? So that's that point. Now, third point is, how do you display this particular card number? So if you look at your ATM slips or POS slips, you'll be able to see that, okay, you have some digit mask. This is to make sure, okay, this is to protect this particular card number. So what standard allows is you can show first 6 numbers and the last 4 numbers. Anything between you will have to cross it out, or you will have to put x66 or things like that. And wherever you show this particular PAN number, it have to be shown with a business justification. You don't want to show this particular full 16-digit number to security guards, right? So one of the audit I had seen is, whenever people lose the ATM card, the security guard take this particular card number. They will write that particular card number in the local register. They will take a photo and they will send this particular, the list of card which is stolen, or which is stuck on the ATM, and they will send it to their group, which also have the main branch people and things like that. But if you look from a PCI standpoint of view, that is very stupid, right? So um, one other scenario is, where they deliver this particular card, right? So this person comes to the bank, and he will get 100 cards, and he will also get a paper with the address of 100 people and the full card number. I don't know why they are doing it, but every time you will have to ask, do this person need full card number? In this particular case, that courier person doesn't need the full card number. He just need the address and probably the last 4 digits. That's pretty much it is. And render PAN unreadable anywhere it is stored. This means you will have to encrypt it. So you will have to use strong encryption, which is something like AES 256 or things like that. And you will have to make sure you have appropriate key management in place. Like, after encryption, how do you decrypt it? Where you are storing the key? What happens? The key is compromised. Things like that. And this requirement number 3 with respect to cryptography is the most heavier requirement, where you will have to look a bit more into how exactly the encryption, decryption, key management, all these things happens. We'll move on to requirement number 4. So requirement number 4 is transmission of the cardholder data across open public network. It's, in a very simple sense, it says you will have to use TLS, right? So anything which is public, like you send it over the internet, or things like that. So you will have to make sure you have HTTPS enabled, and it's sent in a secure fashion. Questions on requirement 3 or 4?
Yeah.
Yes.
Like after authorization, we can store the CVV pin block. You told right in the
before authorization.
Before authorization, we can store. After the authorization, it will be delete, right?
Yeah, you will have to delete.
Okay, fine. If the authorization goes wrong, or if authorization, if I am entering the wrong password, it will also delete, right? I mean the wrong pin.
Right. So if the transaction comes back as declined, still you have to remove the CVV or whatever sensitive authentication data you are storing. So you will have a try saying, okay, I want to settle this particular transaction. I want to authorize this particular transaction. If the password is wrong or anything like that, you will have to try again probably. And if still that particular transaction doesn't go through, you will have to make sure you remove all the SAD from the transaction, and it is the transaction is not complete, right? So this is where people. This is where people see the air hostess going behind passengers saying, sir, this payment is pending or anything like that. So by the time it lands and pull into the tarmac, the transaction will be gone through, and they will get the exact status of how many failed and whom should we talk to.
Okay, fine.
Right. Any other questions? Right. So next we will look into requirement number 5. Requirement number 5 is also dealing with the antivirus. This is also a very simple requirement. So basically, it says that you need to have antivirus on all the in scope system. Now, standard gives a terminology saying, commonly affected machines. So when we used to do audit initially, like 10 years back or something like that, people used to come back and say, I have a Linux server, I don't have any virus, but that's not the case, so any system which have a potential in terms of infection, you will have to make sure that some sort of antivirus is there. It we can look into this particular definition of commonly affected based upon what kind of platform it is or where it sits in the network. For example, if it sits in DMZ, it is a possibility that many people will come and attack that particular server. They will do some sort of file upload vulnerability and see whether we can exploit. So many different attacks can happen, right? So it is mandatory, or it is prudent for us to put AV in machines which is there in the DMZ, or AV in machines which is which is common in the nature. Now, machines which are not common, like a mainframe or some old OSs, if we are not putting antivirus on that particular system, it is also something which we will have to look at on a periodic basis. Is this still the case? So for example, initially, if you look at 5, 6, or probably 10 years back, there was not much viruses on the Mac, right? So it was okay to not have antivirus on the Mac. But if you look now, there are more viruses or malware on the Mac than Windows, because Windows had gone through, it had gone beaten up, and they had fixed all the chinks in the armor. But in the case of Mac, it's getting popular. Now we are looking at different exploit and things like that. So it's prudent to evaluate, whether this particular platform still doesn't have any malware out there, which is something. What is the risk of that particular system? We will have to evaluate and take a judgment call on that. We'll move on to requirement number 6. Requirement number 6 is more to do with how you develop the application. This is where we will have to look at how the application is deployed. Like, one of the example is, do we have dev and production on the same network? That's something no, right? So do we have a change management in place? How do we check in the code? How do we make sure the code is not tampered after it? How do we test it, once the code is committed, right? So these are some of the controls which goes into requirement number 6. It also look at and say that, okay, these are some of the techniques we will have to test for. This current standard is a little bit older, so it derives from OWASP 2013. So this is somewhat a relational mapping in terms of PCI requirement number 6.5.1 to 5.10. So they will basically ask, okay, do you check for these particular thing? And on the right side, they have got inspired from OWASP. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to only check for this. You will have to go and check for what is relevant now. For example, in 2017 OS, we have a XXE vulnerability, right? So, but standard doesn't say that. That doesn't mean that we will have to not check XXE. Whatever is relevant to that particular technology or that particular stack, we will have to go and test for it. So we'll look for one particular question. Which of the following cannot be in the same network segment? So we have discussed about this. UAT and production should not be in the same network environment. So any questions on requirement number 6 and 5?
Just cannot be same. Development and test.
Development and test can be in the same network.
No, cannot be same network.
It can be in the same network. Development and test can be in the same network. Production is something should not be in the same network.
UAT and prod?
Yes, I said it.
Like, is it right question? Like UAT and fraud
Yes,
are
I
not
said
allowed.
it. That is correct. Am I audible? Hello?
Yeah, you are audible.
Yeah, yeah. So that is correct. UAT and production is something which you should not put in the same network. So we'll look at other requirements also. We have a few more. Requirement 7 and 8 talks about access control. Requirement 7 says least privilege. So just like what we talked about data retention or scoping or things like that, this is similar technique in terms of scoping out people. So we will not give access to different things for people who don't need them. So this is following the principle of least privileges. So why does this particular person need access to this particular system? On what level? So we don't give him admin privileges. We don't give unnecessary permission, which he doesn't need, right? So that is the core fundamental of this particular requirement of requirement number 7. Requirement number 8 talks about access control, which means you need to have username password, you need to have a two-factor authentication, when the password should should be rotated, how long the password have to be. So PCI says you need to rotate the password every 90 days. You need to have minimum 7-character password, and some of the externally connected system, which is a remote access, you need to have a 2FA happening on that particular system. So on a high level, this is what the requirement 8 talks about. Now, requirement now 9 talks about physical control. Um, this is what we are privy to a lot of different places, where you have a CCTV camera, you have a security guard, you will make sure you are, you have an entry, you have an exit, you have a visitor badge. Somebody is assisting you you when you get into the organization, so on and so forth. So requirement number lays out different controls what you can adopt, and that's something which you'll have to implement it. So that's all about requirement number 9. And requirement number 10 talks about log management. This is also one of the technically strong requirement, where you will have to make sure you track and monitor all the access to network resources and cardholder data. Now, so far we were putting controls, right? We put IAV, we put firewall, we put encryption, things like that. Now, what we are in this particular requirement, what we are doing is a detective control, where we will say that, okay, I'm going to pull logs from all this particular machine to see if there is something going wrong, right? Now, these are the typical systems we will have to pull logs from, security devices, network devices, servers, wireless access points, FIM is called a file integrity monitoring system, which looks for any change in the files. These files can be config files, or programs, or things like that. So if, for example, if a hacker comes in and if we change any code, the FIM will raise an alert, and it will go to the your security operations center to see whether that particular change happened, and somebody have analyst will have to go and look into it. Now, we will collect all these particular logs, and what standard says is you need to store this particular logs in an internal network. So if you look at the diagram, you have an external network, you have a DMZ, you have an internal network. Now, what standard says is you need to store all these particular logs in an internal network. So why so is because uh, systems in the DMZ is mostly infected. So if you put the log server in the DMZ, there is a chance that, okay, log server also get compromised and we will lose all the data, right? If it is put on a separate network inside the internal network, the chances of that particular machine getting compromised is much lower. And even if something happens on the other, other network segments, we will have some sort of snapshot in the log server saying, okay, what exactly might have happened there. Right? Any questions on these requirements 7, 8, 9, and 10?
Yeah, I have a question on the requirement 6.
Right.
Like you explained OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities, right? In this section, we have to review the code level also. It's a secure code review also. It's required.
Yes, secure code review is also required. So this is mostly driven with respect to how the organization is structured. In most organization, I see this as a peer review, where somebody writes the code, somebody reviews it, or two-person review it before it is actually merged into the main branch.
Okay. Okay, fine, fine.
Right. Any other questions? If you have any questions, please note down in the chat, so I'll be able to answer it out. Now we'll move on to requirement number 11. This is the most important requirement for us, basically because this is where all the testing and VAs and PTs, all these things happen. So there are 4 different types of VA and PT activity happens in PCI DSS scoped environment. So we have an internal VA, we have an external VA, we have an internal PT, we have an external PT. Now, internal VA we will have to do every quarter, like once in 90 days, we will have to do both internal VA and external VA. External VA is something which we will have to use something called approved scanning vendor. Only these people can do external VA. These are folks which is approved by the PCI Council itself. So basically, they will have some sort of exam. These people will have to pass it. Then only they will give the approval. So external VA have to be done by an ASU, which is approved scanning vendor. Internal VA, anybody can do it. If you have a vendor, they can do it. If you have somebody competent in your organization, you can do it. That's how it is. Then we will have to do internal PT and external PT once in a year. So this is typical penetration testing activity. This also anybody can do it. If you have a service provider, they can do it. If you have a competent person in house, he can also do it. Now the critical word here is competent, because when we do the audit, I had seen a lot of places where they do an Nmap scan and say that, okay, I have done the PT. Now that is not counted as a PT, and that is not counted as a competent penetration testing, right? So you will have to make sure your resources have adequate capability to do this particular penetration testing activity. If not, you will have to rely on somebody who can do that, right? Now, what is the differentiation between internal and external VA? Now, if you look at the same diagram which we had seen earlier, you have the external network. So and PT have to be done outside of the firewall. It's like actual hacker coming from the external network to see what ports are there, what kind of services you operate. It's a typical what we do in a bug bounty or things like that. So this have to happen outside of the firewall. Internal VA, what it does is it is trying to emulate what if an employee goes wrong, what if a system is compromised, what if there is a malware on that particular system which is sitting inside the network. Now that is why we do internal VA, these checks for different patch levels, and see whether if there is something which is exploitable or things like that. What we'll have to do is we'll have to do a first round of internal VA or a PT. We'll have to make sure these people fix this particular issues, and we will have to retest it. Now, we'll have to make sure we have a clean report. All the identified issues have to be fixed, and we should be able to get a clean report for both this particular internal VA and external VAPT and internal VAPT activity. And this is fundamentally the most non-compliant requirement. A lot of people miss this. But if you are very prudent in terms of sticking to a calendar, making sure correct patches are applied, um, this is a very easy requirement. Like what we had seen from requirement 1 till 8 or something like that is where we are building that particular use case or a processes or things like that. Now in 10 we have a preventive control where we were checking what if something goes wrong. And requirement number 11 is actually the material comes in, and this is where we test, okay, have you done properly? Have you done your job properly? If you have a proper patch management solution in place, I shouldn't see any VA bug. But if I see some patch issues or something like that, that means there is a fundamental flaw in some other place where the process is not aligned, right? This is more about requirement number 11. It talks only about the policy. So basically, it says you need to have policy for all the different controls we have in place. The main policies which they talked about is these. Information security policy, acceptable usage policy, encryption policy, antivirus policy, things like that. So this is where they will say that, okay, how long I should store the card number. When I say that, okay, we will store the card number for 4 years, that should be the standard across the organization. So now, if you look at typical organization, on year one, there will be only 10 employees, but in year four, there will be 500 employees, right? They will have double the growth or quadruple the growth, So how do we make sure all the people who joins the organization the standard? That is where we put this particular policy, which is like a broadcast communication, where any place they want to take a judgment call in terms of how do I do the log management, right? They will be able to come to this particular log management document and say that, okay, my organization want me to store the logs offline for 1 year and online for 90 days. So I should follow that particular standard. So these are the major policies which PCI asks for. And along with that, we have to do a risk assessment. We will have to make sure we have responsibilities assigned, so on and so forth. So any questions on 10, 11, and 12 requirements? Right, since we don't have any questions, I think we are at the end of the presentation. So overall, if you have any questions, you can type it in the chat box. We should be able to answer it.
Hi Roshan, this is about PCI DSS applicability requirement. Now, when we talk about PCI DSS scope environment,
Team, please.
now when we're talking about
Sorry to interrupt you.
now when we're talking about so when we're talking about PCI DSS scoped environment, there are two scenarios whereby if you are holding transmitting cardholder data, you need to comply with PCI DSS. That is one thing. Sometimes when you are not accessing all these data, you are just acting as a third party provider for some solution, but that solution is coming in the system of a merchant which is holding PCI which is PCI DSS scoped environment. So what should be the discretion at this point of time? Suppose I'm a third party service provider and the merchant is telling me to comply with PCI DSS, although I'm not storing or doing anything with the card data. So how should we go about telling whether PCI DSS is mandatory for that third party service provider or not?
Right. So the best method is to contact any of the QSA, so the company which I work is Crossbow. So, reach out to these particular companies or reach out to your acquiring, the banks or somebody who's proposing you to get PCI DSS and bring in an SME, subject matter expert, so that they will be able to, guide you in terms of, how the PCI is applicable here. Because like you have told, I have had seen a lot of scenarios, that the PCI is not generally applicable for some of these organizations, and some of these banks or some of these acquiring bank or banks ask these people to go and get PCI DSS certified, but generally it might not be relevant in that particular case. So the best way to evaluate is to check out with a subject matter expert in terms of whether it is applicable or not. And it is again case to case basis, how your network is, how your business is different from any other businesses out there, right?
Right. So, okay, here's a scenario. A merchant is PCI DSS compliant, and we have an application installed by a third-party provider who is also managing that application after installation. So, what they do is they just give push notifications on a particular scenario, meaning suppose patch management has to happen. So they would just give out push notifications on this system. What would be the scenario in this case? I mean, we talk about these situations also whereby if you're a managed service provider for firewalls or some PCI DSS scope environment, that is one thing. But here is an environment here is a solution which is only giving out push notifications to that system which is PCI DSS compliant. So should they go for
Right. So
PCI?
yeah, primarily I think they should go for PCI, but we will have to evaluate what and how the technology works. Now, like I said in the scoping statement, anything which connects or, directly or indirectly, that is the caveat there, So if this person have an agent or, something like that sitting on the PCI network, then probably these people will have to go for PCI DSS certification. So like I said, each business and each use case is different. So we will have to evaluate, understand how the network is, what is the traffic flow. Then we will be able to come through to a conclusion whether they have to go for PCI or not.
Understood. Okay.
ஆதார் நம்பர் வேணுமா தமிழ் கொடி அப்படின்ற ஒரு நம்பர் வேணும்.
Any other questions? So if there is no other questions, we'll wrap up this session for today. I'll pass it over to Adam.
Thanks, Roshan. It was a very good introduction for the PCI, as you rightly told. A lot of homework we need to go and download and go in detail, and it gives a lot of insight and I should say thrust to go and download that standard and start reading. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Roshan. Thanks for your time, and it was a very informative session. Like 2 years back, if I seen PCADS, it's like a alien word for me. Like I doesn't know like how a transaction works in background and things like that. But this clears like how normally occurs, and like even if we open like PhonePe or Google Pay, like it will be having a uh, it shows like PCID is certified by some company name, something like that. So it was like uh, that is a legitimate ads and things like that. So thanks, Roshan. It was a great session.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam.
Naveen, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have one question actually. Say, Roshan, I am developing an application. Say, example, I'm using a Google CAPTCHA, Google authentication. The application is connected with our applications, right? Say, example, Google CAPTCHA or something. So, which Google also need to do some level standards. Is that correct?
So, like I told, we will have to look what exactly the underlying systems are doing.
Okay.
Then only we will be able to do a call in terms of whether this person have to do with PCI. Typically, it have to involve with the card related functions or anything which is affecting a card related function, right? So
Okay. Say example, the application should be having login. So might be protect the brute force attack. So I'm integrating Google CAPTCHA. So in this scenario, the Google has to have sorry, PCI compliance.
not necessarily, because see, for example, your login page, that is where your Google API, reCAPTCHA skills are. The payment doesn't happen on the login page, right? The payment on the payment page, and that particular scenario, your JavaScript or anything from Google is not coming into the picture, right? So like I said, we will have to evaluate on a case-to-case basis and understand how it works. But in a typical other scenario, you might have heard about this mega cart attack, right? It is
Yeah.
similar to a JavaScript, which is posted on, which is tampered into a payment page, which takes the card number and send it to another API, right? So
Yes. Yes.
we will have to evaluate, what scripts are getting loaded on this particular page and what are the functions, things for that. And then we will be able to say that, okay, this person have to be there or this person have to do this.
Okay. Okay. That's great.
Right. So,
Um,
can we move on to next session, or do we have any questions, team?
No. No.
Okay. So, even if you have questions, you can put it in the chat. We will discuss in the later point of time. So, I'll be presenting in the second session, which is the awareness session on financial frauds. It is related to the financial frauds which has happened from the past to present. Like many things we have seen in the, it can be a news, or it has happened to us, many things. So I'm just sharing my screen. Please let me know the screen is visible or not. Right. Is it my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I didn't have any presentation in place. So this is a booklet which is released by Reserve Bank of India a couple of weeks back. I have uploaded my resources in the Null Villupuram page, Null community. You can download it right away, or you can Google it and download it. So this is basically of what are the frauds currently, like bank-based frauds, or physical frauds or non-banking frauds. Those things will be discussed in this session. So let's move on to part A, which is bank-related frauds. So from the start of mm, like when I started my career, I see many phishing links or things like that. Many people will say, okay, it's a phishing thing, like that. So some what do you say, the in SMS or in WhatsApp or in Facebook, there will be some phishing links will be coming in a clone page. For example, Flipkart.com. The hacker will make a clone of a Flipkart.com, and they will be selling. It will be same like that website, and like victims will follow up on that website. Like they will be giving their card numbers or their sensitive information like username, password, and they will do the transaction. So once they press checkout and do payment, it will be moved on to a original Flipkart.com or a Google.com, something like that. So it's a normal scenario on phishing. So if you have any questions, you can please stop and ask me anytime, or you can type in the chat too. So I'm moving on to the next attack vector, which is phishing. Phishing is like calling and asking a person. Like for example, there is a old old attack scenario. Even if you search in Google, some people will sorry. Even if you search in YouTube, you'll be having some records on that. Like many people will ask you about the card numbers. Can you please tell me your 16-digit card numbers and the CVV numbers? And there will be a OTP coming on your phone. Please tell me that. So, with the help of those details, they will be taking over your cards and balances about that. So, in this booklet, you can able to see the precaution also. Like, for example, if you take phishing links, so whatever links are coming in your WhatsApp or um, it can be a Excel file or a PDF file, whatever you didn't want to directly download it in your desktop or from your email. for example, normal Excel file, if we embed a macro and send it to a victim, we can able to get a reversal. That is a normal attack. It will happen. But if you have a good antivirus in place, like for example, a Bitdefender or a Kaspersky, whatever in place, you need to keep it updated and you need to safeguard yourself from the phishing attacks or something like that. So that's it about the phishing. For phishing, like uh, even like many service provider or a bank, they will keep on sending you SMS. Like we won't ask you CVV numbers or a OTP or card numbers, password like that. Even service providers like Airtel, Vodafone, or somebody, they will tell you, okay, from our branch, we won't ask you any um, financial related informations from you. So you need to be very cautious on what your uh, like if any call is coming, you need to ask them like whom you are. Like you won't tell the sensitive information, even if it can be your PAN card number, whatever. So I got a call. Like I was seeing some YouTube videos regarding this phishing attacks. Uh, I thought, okay, if I got a call from any person, I thought of uh, backtracking them, like how to. I need to find their location. Where are they calling from? So I got a call from them. So they asked me, give me your uh, 16-digit card number. So I told 1 2 3 4 5 6. Like these are my card numbers. Like or else I told my test card numbers, like which is available in online. 4111, which is a default test card number of Visa. So I told like where are you calling from? Which bank you are calling from? Why are you asking this question? So they afraid and they cut on the call. Like we need to uh, many people I see like they will be creating some links like IP tracker or something like that, and they will identify the current location. So have you got any experience in these two attacks like phishing or wishing? Have you experienced in these two attacks? Like have you seen in your real life or something like that? Hello, am I audible? Okay. Like I got a response from Sujip. He was getting this uh, attack many times. Anybody have any experience on this? Okay. Let's move on to the next thing, which is frauds using online selling platform. For example, like they will be creating, they will be using OLX or quick kind of online selling platform to sell their products. Like even if the product is not there, they will be selling on behalf of others, and they will be okay. I'll give you the product, but please send me the money before. Even nowadays, many people are selling the products um, via Instagram also. Like, please send me the money first, then I'll be dropping you the products in your doorstep. So this is not the right way, right? Like you need to genuinely do via some genuine e-commerce platforms or something like that. So what they do is like in they will be using some online selling platforms like OLX or something. They will okay, give me the money. If the victim ask like send you please send me the UPI ID of you, so I'll be dropping you the money back. So instead of sending a money, what they will do is they'll be requesting the money. For example, like this. So this is a normal scenario, like how request money will works in phone pay or Google like that. So if you pay the money, what attacker or the evil guy do, they will break their SIM cards and they will go away. That's it. So we can't do anything about that. But in Google Pay, they have implemented some uh, privacy mechanism, like it will show like warning, this might be a spam thing, like that. So whatever money transaction you do, it's all in your risk only. Like if money transaction has been failed, you can raise the dispute and you will be getting a money back. But if you are falling for any kinds of frauds or anything like that, it all depends on your own risk only. So how we can prevent from the frauds using online selling platforms? Like mm, you need to be very careful on making a financial transaction in online products. So instead of buying it directly, like by giving your card numbers or something like that, you can uh, buy the product using a cash on delivery. Like once you see the product and things like that, you can pay for it. And always remember, you didn't want to enter any pin or password anywhere in this. And even for the UPI apps, I told some people will. There is a case happens like 3 weeks back. I seen a attack happens. There is a guy who is having the hotel, and another guy is the attacker. So he requests for a. I need to. I'm just making a party, so I need a large amount of what do you say, food items I need for this party. So I'm a military guy, so I didn't want to disclose anything. So this is my UPI thing, and once the food is ready, I'll be giving you the money back. So what this guy done in Chennai, so he has made all the food and things like that for the food delivery things. So he was expecting for a money back from the evil guy. So what he does, instead of sending the money, he just requested the money. So this guy, what it does, he just paid for it, and he lost money. So this case happened like 2 3 cases are happened uh, on this. So you need to be very cautious on making any online payments using a UPI or online platforms like that. So fourth case is like frauds due to unknown or unverified mobile applications. So in Google Play Store, there are tons of applications out there, but uh, if the applications are, there are some applications like it can be a media player or it can be a rummy, or it will be a clone of the same application. Like for example, WhatsApp, if you type WhatsApp, there will be list of 3 4 applications will be listed in the Google Play Store. So you need to find the legitimate application and download and use it. So if you I- if you download and use the unverified apps from the third party sites or something like that, it will prompt for something like ask you for the Facebook username, password, or something like that to enter, and same like a phishing kind of thing only. It will steal your username and password. So didn't download anything from the unverified or unauthorized sources. Even in Android, there is some option called unknown sources. You, if you tick it, you can able to download or install from the unknown sources. But if it is unticked, it will ask you for the permission to do it. So every time uh, you need to download the legitimate apps and use it for your own purpose. So the fifth case is the ATM card skimming. So this also like a older attack only. Like even in many movies, Hollywood or Hollywood, we have seen it. Like what evil guy will do, he will be placing a skimmer device in ATM, and he will be placing a pinhole camera to record the pins, and he will be recording the keystrokes from the keyboard also. So this will also happen in the ATM card scanning. So this is something like a older kind of attack. So till this, do you have any questions, guys? Hello, am I audible? Hello. uh, Hello. Okay, got it. Thanks, Sujit. Yeah, so this is on the top of the ATM card scanning things. So let's move on to the next part. Frauds using a screen sharing app or a remote access. For example, if you are giving your laptop for a service and things like that, and you get it back. So if you if you have any repair or something, you will ask somebody. It can be your friend or it can be anybody. So what they will do, okay, please on your AnyDesk or Zoom to see your screen. So I'll troubleshoot it. So if you know that person like personally, you can share your screen, but they will tell, like, somebody will tell, okay, download this software and use this kind of thing. So didn't download any unauthorized software from anything, like who like to the strangers, didn't share any. So didn't share your screen or install any NDS or Zoom if a stranger telling you. So this is a precaution for this. So even this has happened. Like there is an article I read recently on this. Um, so what this guy done? Okay, the victim, he knows. Okay, they are recording or they are seeing my bank transaction things. So what they have done is, he just given us a Bitly file link with IP tracker, and he found his location and things like that. So when chatting, he told, okay, from this location you are doing it, and even some places it will happen. If there is a old people or anything, they will be keep on insisting us to do, okay, take your card, please tell your numbers, we are blocking your accounts, please tell it as soon as possible, like that. So this also a moderate attack happen. So next one is a swim swipe or swim cloning models. So every SIM cards you use, it will expire in, like, if you are not using it, it will expire in a 1 month time frame. It was not before, but it was happening now. So I bought a SIM card, so I was keep on getting a central bank notification things. No, but I didn't have any central bank accounts in place. So I thought, okay, it is mm, it was used by other person, so I was getting a notification on that. So uh, in this case, if uh, anybody is using the same mobile number, and they can able to retrieve their account if they know the account number and things like that, they can use it for the net banking purposes. So uh, this is the attack of SIM swipe or SIM cloning thing. Yeah, frauds by comparing credentials on results through search engine models. Um, for example, if you have any HDFC Bank or ICICI Bank things, like wherever you subscribe for a service, you search for a customer care mobile number. So in that, instead of the legal legitimate HDFC mobile number, if anybody have other mobile numbers or a customer website to support form, victim will fall on that, and they will use that customer support number to do any malicious activity. So this is on the scan through QR code. Every QR code, like mostly nowadays we are doing like digital transaction only, like not like before, like we are not using any cash or things like that. We are using QR code transaction, right? Like every QR code will have a embedded account number. For example, if I have a Google Pay or a Phone Pay, my QR code will have my account number and things like that. So we can able to create our own QR codes to do this. For example, if a local shop is nearby, he is a merchant and he is selling something. For example, it can be a milk product or something. He'll be displaying his QR code, right? So instead of that, if I paste my QR code in that, I'll be getting money on behalf of him. So this is the QR code scan. So you need to be very cautious on scanning. Every time if you scan the QR code, you need to ask them, the merchant or anybody who is the shop owner. So is this your account, or is it different one? So by doing that, you can doing the legitimate transaction. So impersonating through social media. Um, this happens recently, not recently, it was happening from the past years. So recently what I see, like one of my college professor was affected by this attack. Like instead of him, there is somebody impersonate on behalf of him, and they were and that guy was asking money from same college student, give me some 5,000, I'll be returning you tomorrow, like that. So what this guy done, okay, our professor is asking the money, so I'll be sending it. So then he lost like more than 10K on this attack. So this is a usual attack which is happening daily to impersonating on behalf of others. And the 11th attack is juice jacking. So for precaution for the this 10th attack is, do not charge any payments to unknown persons. Like if you, even if you know the person, you need to call and ask them, okay, like seriously, you need money, or somebody is impersonating on behalf of you, or something like that. So you need to ask them, even if they are from abroad or something like that. So 11th is a juice jacking attack. In railway stations or in airport, we will be having the sockets in place for doing for charging our mobile phones, right? So this attack is like simple, like whenever so every time we use this USB cable, it is for the file transfer purpose, right? So imagine if the socket is having a malware. So if you connect it to the socket, and the malware will affect your mobile phone, and it will steal sensitive data like your contacts or your whatever you stored in the mobile. So this is a juice jacking attack on that. So avoid using that, and you can use your normal batteries you use for mobiles or laptops kind of thing if you travel. So as of now, do you have any doubts, guys? Do you have any doubts?
No, ad clear.
Thanks, Hari. Thanks, Hari. Uh, I'll move on to this lottery fraud. Um Lottery fraud, like we see, like in many places, the Nigerian fraud, like somebody will email you and saying that, okay, I'm from this country, I'm stuck in some place, I have $10 million or something, I need to move on to your country, I'm interested to invest in your country. So I'll place you, I'll move this $10 million to you. So for doing that, I need some money to transfer into your country. So I need some 50K or 1 lakh. So give it to me, I'll be transferring to your account. So many places we see this lottery fraud in many places. So have you experienced this lottery fraud in emails or anything? Even the job fraud also same, like for example, it can be a consulting service or anything like that. There will be many job seekers in the Naukri or anything like that. So what they will do is they will create a clone page, and or they will make a fake consulting service. Whoever is seeking for a job, like whoever call for an online course or something, they will tell to pay for this much. Okay, uh, please pay us like 20K or 10K to join this job. So we will be giving you a guarantee job offer. So these two are related to the online. This is for the money, and this is for the job thing. So do not make any payments or you need to secure credentials for any kind of lottery calls or something like that. And nobody will ask you money for offering you a job. If a company is hiring you, they will interview you and they will be make you into that position. So nobody will ask you any money for this. So that's it about the lottery fraud and online job fraud. So Part B is a non-banking financial company. For example, um there will be many loan schemes happen, personal loan schemes. Like if I'm seeking for a loan, I'll be directly contacting to the bank and I will ask. There will be some agents or some brokers, they will tell, okay, I'll provide you, I'll ask the bank and I'll provide you a bank, sorry, loan things uh, in a low interest rate. So many people will fall on this and they will be uh, what is it? Many people will fall on this and they will be lost their money. So this is about the fake advertisement for extending loan by fraudsters. So SMS based SMS, email, or instant messaging, call scam, or OTP scam. This is related to our mobile related attacks. For example, like attacker will send a huge list of bulk messages and they will call to each person, whoever he send the messages. He'll be asking, okay, we are providing a loan uh, like with a low interest rate. What you so these are the sanctions we have already done before. Like they will show some copies of fake checks or something like that we have got for other person, and they will do fake on this. Same with the OTP based fraud. Like if somebody is suddenly calling you and asking you, okay, we are from this bank or we are from this service, your account is going to expire now. Please tell us the OTP. We have sent you just now. So this is on the OTP fraud. This is also kind of a old attack techniques only. So never share any OTP or a PIN or a CVV number to anybody. Same with whatever it comes in the SMS or in the WhatsApp or emails. Didn't click any links or from the unknown resources it comes. So this is the precaution for both the SMS and OTP based attacks. Same like app frauds and fake loan website. These are same like a phishing and mobile application related attacks which we seen before. The fifth one is the MLM schemes. There are many companies doing this. Like it started from uh, XYZ company, and they will tell, okay, if you join, if you invested 10K money, if you join your friends money also will be giving to you. So this is also a old attack vector which comes from the 90s also. Like if your friends are earning, you will be getting the money back for this. So this is somewhat older technique. Fraud documents, like fraudulent loans with the forged documents. Like for example, um, if your KYC documents or any sensitive document, it can be a checkbooks or anything like that, you have given for a Xerox or on behalf of you, if the identity theft happen, if the document has been theft, this document can be used to avail the loan on behalf of you. Like it's a kind of identity theft only. So these are the attack vectors which RBI has said, okay, as of now, from past to present, this has been happened. These are the precaution you need to take, and they have given some general precaution also, like you need to use two-step authentication in every application or every website you use. Check like whatever website you are visiting, it needs to be HTTPS protected, and every payment gateway you visit, it needs to have a padlock symbol. Like like this kind of symbol will be displaying in the website in a green color. So you need to keep your PAN, which is personal identification number, PIN, and credit card number, debit card number, and CVV needs to be private. Didn't share with anyone, and didn't save any passwords or card numbers in any websites or devices, laptops, kind of thing. And yeah, as I told before, the two-factor authentication is available in every website, every software you use, and whatever emails you are receiving, didn't open any attachment, whatever from the phishing links or anything. Even nowadays, Google emails are showing like, okay, whatever text files or zip file we are getting, it shows okay, this is from the unknown source or something like that. So even do not share the copies of checkbooks or KYC documents with any strangers. So this is for the internet browsing or internet banking purpose. So whenever you are visiting a cyber cafe, for example, a internet center near you, didn't log out from every session whenever if you do any transaction, and use the virtual keyboard only, and do not use any same password. For example, some people will have same password for email, and they will be having using the same password for Facebook or any other accounts they use. So didn't reuse your passwords for internet banking or anything like that. Same with the internet browsing too. So avoid using unsecured websites, avoid using unknown browsers. Like apart from as of now, Firefox and Chrome are okay, legal browser something. Even they are giving the updates regular basis, whatever attack happens in that. And avoid entering credentials in the unknown websites. Do not share any information to unknown persons on social media also. And they have given some device and computer security measures, like install antivirus, strong antivirus in place, not a free edition of antivirus. Uh, Whenever you plug into the USB, scan and use it, and do not like normally device if you use in a physical in publicly or in your office or even in your home to lock your device and go for a interval or something like that. So do not install any unknown application or software. So these are the mm, preventive measures they have given from the RBI side. So do we have any questions? So that's it from me. Yeah. Do you guys have any questions?
No, Adam, it was clear.
Okay. Then we can wind up the call. Um, for regular updates, you can follow our uh, Facebook page or Null community page and YouTube channel. Like whatever sessions we are doing, we will be recording background and we'll be posting it in the later point of time in the YouTube. Same, you can follow our Twitter and Facebook page also for getting the recent updates from us. So that's it from me. Thanks for joining and thanks for being in the till last. So if you have any
Thank
feedbacks, you
you.
can share with me. Do you have any feedbacks for me or for the previous session? Thanks, Sujit.
So thank you, Adam, for providing a section on awareness frauds, financial frauds. So it was a nice session.
Okay,
So thank you so much for providing those sessions.
thanks, sir. Thanks, everyone. So this is our third meetup. So it was went very well. We'll connect you back soon. So every monthly we will be conducting two meetups, 2 weeks once. So I'll be keeping you posted. So you can follow our social media tag and things like that. Thanks for joining. Bye.
Okay, bye.